we may take the baton from then. We go live. I count up here. I leave a little something for Cecil to trim off when he does the show. Sometimes I forget to do at the end of the show. I cut it off really fast, but we're back. We're going to talk about summer vacation at the end, too, because I was up in your neck of the woods, actually.
Oh, come on, see, you got to let me know, brother.
Well, we only did that little corridor of death in like Illinois and Indiana, like right along the lake to make it to Michigan. But I may be in the upper Midwest more in the future.
Yes, so please let me know. I'd love
absolutely.
To get together.
Absolutely. I know a few places in Chicago. Yeah,
man.
Oh, yeah. I love that energy. And let's get it going now. Which Washington running back should you draft? That and more this week on The Couch. The return of The Couch, the return of Evan Silva. Evan, what's the angle in the Washington backfield?
Well, I think that there are now 3 running backs that are draftable in the Redskins backfield. I think that the clear and present upside is Antonio Gibson. Scott Turner apparently had a big role in wanting to draft Antonio. But entering the draft process, I remember, learning about Antonio Gibson, watching him a little bit, looking at his production in college and thinking, wow, he's going to be an intriguing 5th, 6th, 7th round pick for like Sean Payton. But the Redskins really went in on Antonio Gibson, taking him 66th overall. Scott Turner played a big role in that. Now you're pulling out one of their very few playmakers in the Washington offense, and all of a sudden Antonio Gibson has a clear pathway toward, I think, 6, 7, 8 carries a game and doing what he does best, which is catch passes and make plays as a receiver. I think you can line him up in the slot. Throw him swing passes, have him run wheel routes. And look, there's not a safe floor here. But I think that once you start to get into the 7th and 8th rounds, and I've seen him go a little bit earlier than that. He went in the 8th round in our Apex League to JJ, which I think was an excellent pick. I took him in the 7th round the other day. I think that once you get into that range, you're not really caring about floors anymore. You're really trying to hit home runs. And I think that's what Antonio Gibson gives you. I think that Adrian Peterson now has a real shot at 200 carries, 200 plus carries. And then Bryce Love is, a late round, but a guy that's now worthy of being drafted in the late rounds. Whereas before, it looked like he was maybe the number 4 guy on the depth chart at best. But I'm kind of in on Antonio Gibson pending the rapid rise of his ADP, which has already begun. But I'm in on him as a 7th or 8th round pick for sure right now.
I can see it. I like Gibson. I think I took him in our Roto World Dynasty League. And then David Johnson comes to mind when you watch him, which David Johnson's rookie year should be the cautionary tale of even if he's breaking big plays but not taking over for that established veteran. It was Chris Johnson in David Johnson's case. Be patient, because once David Johnson got the chance to take over at the end of the year, he won leagues for people. I'm glad you brought up Bryce Love, and just as much as them taking Gibson in the 3rd round, the early 3rd round, when they didn't have a 2nd round pick, they were really aroused by Gibson. And it was not a need. They didn't need Gibson, and this is a team that had needs. So yeah, you have to, I was talking about this on a show recently, Evan, that it's almost like the opposite of the assumption of rational coaching, or sometimes why we have to invoke the phrase the assumption of rational coaching, is coaches and organizations want to try to prove that they were right, and that's why Gibson's going to get on the field. And then it's up to Gibson to show what he does demands more. But Bryce Love, they took in the 4th round, even though they knew they weren't going to get anything out of him in his rookie year. It was arguably a different regime, but it sounds like he's going to get a chance. He may actually get the first chance to show that his talent is so undeniable that he should get a role in the backfield. Gibson, the offense. It's all intriguing. And I like how you just added at the end. Yeah, you might dabble in some Gibson, because from that point on, the 7th, 8th round on, his ceiling is as high as any running back out there. Another big move. So if we're looking, this has been boring for the first couple of weeks of training camp because of the nature of this year. But Damian Williams opts out. Now Clyde Edwards-Helaire is going top 7, top 8 overall. I think we've seen links to drafts where he's gone 1-1. We're doing our draft together. It's always cutthroat. The Apex Writers League, star-studded cast. I'm starting to get a complex about this one. Like, I want to at least get to the finals one of these years. You guys make it hard. You had the 10th pick. Evan. You didn't have a chance to think about whether you were going to take Clyde Edwards-Helaire. If you had to think about that, or watching how high he's going in drafts, what's your reaction?
Unsurprising, and I think it is for the most part warranted. Damian Williams. I mean, none of the other guys really on the roster outside of like Darrell Williams have even really spent time, on the team. And Patrick Mahomes, allegedly personally pulled for Clyde Edwards-Helaire to be the Chiefs' first-round pick. He was drawing Brian Westbrook comparisons even before the draft. Brian Westbrook, of course, had a ton of success in Philadelphia under Andy Reid. Such a great fit for the offense. Definitely can run between the tackles, even though he's short. He's not small. I mean, he's almost 210 pounds. He's short, but not small. I mean, his BMI is actually pretty strong. And then, and he's a guy that can line up in the slot. And, Damian Williams opting out was a really, really big win for him. DeAndre Washington, who I do like as a 12th, 13th round pick. I just drafted him in the flex leagues, which are put on by Jake Seeley as like my RB5 or RB6. I think that he became a lot more interesting there. And Darwin Thompson is a guy who I think is back in our lives as a super, super deep sleeper. But I think it's warranted that Clyde Edwards-Helaire is now a consensus top 10 pick. And I've seen him go in the top 5. Actually, in my Pros versus Joe's draft, he went at the 1.01. Clyde Edwards-Helaire did. Now that's a little rich for my blood, but he certainly has elevated. I think it's warranted.
Yeah, well, we can look back to Kareem Hunt, right, as a rookie, and what he was able to do. And this wasn't even the Patrick Mahomes offense, So I love how you mentioned the Andy Reid talking about. It was Andy Reid, right, talking about Edwards-Helaire and Brian Westbrook in the same breath. And he even mentioned that, well, I mean, that sounds lofty coming from me, but that's what I think of him. I just like that Andy Reid is willing, like he doesn't think about, I can't say anything that is going to sound like an actual real human being's opinion. I have to make sure everything is defensible. It's exciting. It's part of why Kansas City's become so much fun to watch and ride in fantasy football, because Andy Reid is letting it go. It's one of those things. I was going to ask you about Miles Sanders, but now I'm going to go off really quickly, because this is kind of one of my soapbox issues right now. And it really revolves around the idea of taking Lamar Jackson or Patrick Mahomes at their ADP. Let's say second round pick, okay? Because I know we talk a lot about regression to the mean. I see a lot of great analysis out there about what happens the next year when an offense scores this many touchdowns, or is this efficient, or when a quarterback is this efficient. But it strikes me, Evan, that other than maybe the Peyton Manning Denver offense and the 2007 Patriots Brady, Moss, Welker offense, and both of those offenses just destroyed all of these rules in fantasy football about how productive and efficient players can be, how much production an offense can support. I can't remember another offense, and Kansas City and Baltimore both apply, where the coaches are really willing to let the quarterback play, like mold an offense that fully embraces their skills, their talents, their inclinations on the field, and that maybe we shouldn't be so quick to assume that the air is going to come out of the balloon, and that these guys, because I look at it, Evan, and I get it, like waiting at quarterback, late round quarterback, it works when the top quarterbacks are like 25 points a game. But when the top quarterbacks are 30 points a game, now you're talking about an advantage that is almost unfair at times. I'm just curious what you think about this.
Well, the Ravens are in position to have another great season offensively. Let's just start with, the climate and the fact that no one's practicing yet, and everyone's got to meet each other over Zoom conferences. Like the Ravens they're bringing back their head coach. Greg Roman's back. Wink Martindale's back. Like those guys easily in a normal year, I think, could have gotten head coaching jobs. They're bringing back, they lost Marshall Yanda, which stinks, but they're bringing back 4 or 5 offensive line starters. They're bringing back their QB1, their wide receiver 1, their tight end 1, the nuts and bolts of what was one of the best pass defenses in the league last year. They also drew a very soft schedule. And this is a team that has struggled at times when it has had to play from behind. but when it is played in positive game scripts, it's been almost unstoppable. And so drawing that soft schedule, having all the continuity really works in the favor of Lamar Jackson. I do think that we just don't see quarterbacks repeat 9% touchdown rate. So I think that his touchdown passes maybe go from like 36 to 27 or something like that. Maybe he runs for a few more. I think that offensively they're probably just not going to score quite as many touchdowns as they did last year, but they're still going to be an offense that is set up to impose its will and dominate games, and they can stop you with the pass. And, they beefed up their defensive front as well. Calais Campbell. I mean, they're just going to be a good team, and investing in good teams with good offenses is generally really smart process in fantasy football. And so willing to buy pretty much any of the Ravens. I got a lot higher recently on Mark Ingram.
Yeah.
Moved him from RB29 to RB20. And he's now a guy that I actively want to target in drafts to be. I mean, you could draft him as your RB3, a fine, RB2 in like the 5th or 6th round. Although I think that there will be some statistical regression, just because that's what history tells us, this is still going to be an awfully good offense that we can lean on and depend on. And I also like taking J.K. Dobbins, because I think that he might start slow just because of, he's not getting on the field there. He's not even able to get out there and show his talents. But man, when he busts that first 55-yard touchdown run, or makes a big play in the passing game, which he absolutely can do, and he can also pass block, he's going to start eating into those touches for Mark Ingram. I think that both guys finish as RB2s this year.
Yeah, I saw you took Dobbins in the 8th round, which is great. Again, keeping with the theme set by Gibson of once it's to the 7th, 8th round and you're taking a running back, you're only thinking about the best case scenario, and you have to love Dobbins' best case scenario. Although it's probably, I'm glad that you are bumping up Ingram. There was that piece from The Athletic about the 4-headed monster. And what I took out of that piece was basically like, take seriously the idea that they're going to use all 4 running backs on any given game. But also that Ingram might not be pushed aside as easily, say, as Marlon Mack, where we're hearing about,
and he's also got like the leadership factor.
Exactly.
Which, I mean, I do think carries, usually I would not really even discuss that, but I do think it carries weight in such a unique and unusual year. That leadership factor, that trust factor with Lamar Jackson, he knows exactly where he's going to need to be. And those things, I think, they're always important, but I think that they're more important than usual in 2020.
I agree with that take, although just what you're making me think about, Evan, is I was watching the ship sinking for the Ravens against the Titans, and every time they would show Lamar Jackson on the bench, he was sitting by himself. And I was thinking, why isn't Mark Ingram going over there to calm him down? Why isn't somebody that has been around for a while telling him, you just got to forget what just happened? Because, I mean, it was an interesting game to show the weakness in Lamar Jackson's emotional armor in that game. Anyway, for fantasy, he went off. Like you said, they had trouble playing from behind, but for fantasy, it was an absolute bonanza. So, yeah, and get pieces of the Ravens offense. Mark Andrews is interesting without Hayden Hurst. Marquise Brown, if he can stay healthy. And if Marquise Brown is healthy, that alone could add a dimension to this offense that could hopefully balance out the loss of Yanda. And I still love Devin Duvernay. Going back to the Apex draft, we just mentioned it. We'll continue to reference the draft. You took Miles Sanders at 10. And what's interesting here, and you kind of got away with it, because then you had the 15th pick and you got Joe Mixon, which is you got to have your cake and eat it too. But there's that tier at the end of the 1st round. So you get your league draft order, you're picking 10th, 11th, 12th. You know who you're looking at there. You're looking at Miles Sanders. You're looking at Josh Jacobs. You're looking at Joe Mixon. You're looking at Nick Chubb and Kenyon Drake, maybe Austin Eckler. These are the guys there. Why Sanders? And is that pretty reflective of Sanders being your clear number 1 in that tier? Or if you had another draft to number 10, maybe you take someone else?
My first tier includes 6 running backs, and the last running back in that tier is Derrick Henry, and then starts a new tier that is headed off by Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and the second running back in that tier is Miles Sanders. So And I think that like I actually pushed Derrick Henry into that first tier yesterday because I have like a growing level of confidence that he's going to be a true every down back this year. You know, Deion Lewis out of the way. Their next back is Darrington Evans, a late third-round pick from Appalachian State. How much are they going to trust him on no practice time? So I think that Derrick Henry ends up playing – I think he's got a shot to catch like 35 passes this year, and that would be a very, very big thing for him. We know that the carry volume is going to be there. They are a team that has a really soft schedule. They're going to play in positive game scripts. In his career, Derrick Henry has averaged 5.8 yards per carry when playing with a lead, only 4.1 when playing from behind. I am on the Titans over this year. Their win total is like 8.5. I think that they're going to be good again. So I'm there on Derrick Henry. And then we begin the new tier with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who obviously has tier 1 upside, but also, you know, has never played a down in the NFL. And then Miles Sanders is my next guy. Over his last 8 games of 2019, Miles Sanders was on pace for 296 touches, 62 catches, over 1,500 yards from scrimmage. The Eagles absolutely could have gone out and got Carlos Hyde or Devontae Freeman. They haven't, sticking with Boston Scott as their number 2 running back. Deuce Staley, you know, their longtime running backs coach, has come out and said, we're not pulling Miles off the field. I like the offense. I like that they're getting a little creative on the offensive line after losing Brandon Brooks and bringing back Jason Peters, who, I mean, you know, him being such a stud athlete. I understand he's old, but he's still a great athlete. You know, I think he's a decent bet to adjust, you know, pretty well to this new right guard position. And they bring back, I think, all their other starters up front. So, yeah, Miles Sanders is pretty elementary to me. You know, I think he's a pretty easy pick within the top 10 picks of a draft. And I thought he was a pretty easy pick for me here.
He definitely has that ability. So I look at those guys, and Chubb is probably the one that's not going to do this because of Kareem Hunt. But Chubb also has the least scary floor. But Miles Sanders, Joe Mixon, Jacobs, to a lesser extent, if the passing game involvement comes online, are guys that, like, by week 3 or 4, Evan, we're like, well, this was a top 5 running back. Like, this, he should have been drafted in that tier you talk about, the one that ends with Derrick Henry. Totally agree with what you said about Derrick Henry, too. Just in general with Tennessee, there's this sense, not so much with Derrick Henry and A.J. Brown, but with Brian Tannehill and Tennessee as a team, that what we saw at last year, once Tannehill took over, is counterfeit in some way, and they aren't going to carry it over.
I think he was counterfeit in that he's not going to lead the NFL in passer rating and yard per pass attempt again. But, I mean, he's also a good fit for the offense. I think the offense is extremely well run under Arthur Smith, who I think might be a head coach in this league by 2021. Their defense under Mike Vrabel has just never given up points. It hasn't been necessarily flashy, but it hasn't given up points. They're returning 4 or 5 offensive line starters, and the guy that they lost, Conklin, they replaced with their first round pick.
Right.
They're a team that really can impose its will on you. And you know, I mean, they're going to be physical. We know what they're going to do. AJ Brown is an absolute freak. I think he reminds me of Terrell Owens. You know, Jonnu Smith is a playmaker after the catch. I liked their team construct. Ryan Tannehill is not going to do what he did last year in terms of efficiency, but I still think that he will be efficient because they put him in situations where he is going to be efficient. And again, you can go back to that. Everyone that gets away from Adam Gase plays better away from Adam Gase, and Ryan Tannehill obviously fits that. I mean, as do many other players.
Yeah, it's wild how discreet and clear that has been when we look down the before and after of players that are touched by Adam Gase. And real quickly on the Miles Sanders thing to add, he was doing that while Boston Scott was still getting like 12, 15 touches sometimes and providing fantasy relevance of his own. Boston Scott, Matt Waldman favorite. And you mentioned Jason Peters, and it was really a coup because like you said, athleticism, and he's got Lane Johnson and Jason Kelsey on either side. He's going to be fine. And if Andre Dillard looks like he's in over his head, they have a case of emergency because Vitae is with the Lions now. So that stuff all breaking well for the Eagles. Not sure how the wide receiver core is going to break for them. That's a whole other topic. On that note, You mentioned the Adam Gase factor. Yes, I'm sure you saw Adam Gase. I think maybe we should try Le'Veon Bell, like detach from the formation, try to do some stuff with them. I think that's good. Devontae Parker, another player. Kenyon Drake, another player. But let's focus on Parker for a second, because I continue to see him. And we're going to talk about the receivers you took, because this Apex League is cutthroat. Even this year, Evan, they make it hard to draft wide receiver. Like, even in this year, the year when every other draft I've been in, I feel like, well, I can kick wide receiver down the street another block.
And even in a year where Siegel had to take a running back in the first round.
I know. You can't get away with this. But actually, I was going to ask you, I'm going to talk to you about the receivers you did take, but one you didn't get to take was Devontae Parker. He went 402, which is about 2 rounds earlier that you're going to see him, just to give you an idea of how this draft goes. And this is going to go to most receivers. Denny took him. And
Denny is doing hardcore 0 RB, although he is crushing it, I think.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be fun to watch how it plays out. But what about Parker? Because I feel like much like Ryan Tannehill, I mean, Devontae Parker was a top 10 receiver last year. And I get it, Preston Williams missed half the year and so on and everything. But still, like, that's quite a discount. 4th round even is a discount for a top 10 receiver last year. Are you buying him at ADP?
I wasn't until about a week ago. I was almost totally off of him. Primarily for the splits that you mentioned. I mean, Preston Williams, before he went down with his ACL tear, was starting to look like the Dolphins' #1 receiver. You remember how good he looked in the preseason, and then he was really starting to pop. And then he tore his ACL exactly at the halfway point, and you all of a sudden saw Mike Gesicki and Devontae Parker's statistics balloon. For Devontae Parker, he went from averaging 49 yards per game to over 100 yards per game in the second half of that season. They also did find some quarterback stability. See, I don't think they're going to have quarterback stability this year, though. I think that, and if you look at their schedule, it's not forgiving at all. So, when the losses start to pile up, I think that they're going to feel urgency to go to Tua. They're installing an entirely new offense under Chan Gailey, who I like, but I don't think that we're going to see them reap the rewards of that offense until 2021. At the same time, reports that Preston Williams might not be ready for week 1. Albert Wilson and Allen Hurns both opted out. And so I've started to warm to Devontae Parker and, look at him from a glass half full standpoint, as opposed to looking at, just the statistical splits with Preston, because we don't know that Preston Williams is an undrafted rookie. He has got, we know he's got talent, but he's got a, sort of checkered history. Now he's dealing with a severe injury that occurred in November. It did not occur at the beginning of the season. And so I have started to warm to him. I've definitely warmed up to Mike Gesicki, who I moved up in my rankings fairly significantly recently. And every day I've been thinking about, for the last week, moving Devontae Parker up. And I have moved him up over some other different positional players, but I still have him right at wide receiver 30. I'm starting to think it's too low.
Yeah. Well, some of it is just accepting. So come on. It has to be that year after year, we wanted to believe in Parker and he would let us down. And then there's this Lucy in the football thing where it's like, okay, maybe kicked the ball last year when he was like a 17th round pick, but I'm not going to pay anything more than a 17th round pick for him because of how often he's left us hurt. It'll be interesting watching Miami. And it's also ironing out, like you mentioned, you alluded to it with quarterback stability. The offense was just morose in the first half of the year. And then in the second half of the year, they rallied behind Ryan Fitzpatrick. I love, by the way, that the football gods still allowed Miami to get Tua, even though Ryan Fitzpatrick had them play their hearts out in the second half of the year, including they hit the Death Star. They hit the shot on the Death Star that exposed where Tennessee blew up the Death Star. And then Cam Newton put on the Darth Vader helmet. So we'll see what happens. What do you think about Newton, by the way? Which are you intrigued? Not just from a fantasy standpoint, but when that happened, so many things happened this offseason. Rob Gronkowski came back. So many things happened this offseason, but because of other things, it kind of got overlooked. And we didn't bask in these stories. Did you bask in the Cam Newton story? Is this going to be another one where Belichick gets the drop on everybody, even though he had 3 months where they could have stopped him?
And not to sidetrack too much, but I think that the fact that there are going to be no preseason games, which the preseason would have already started, has really, like, I think we're realizing now how much the preseason gets people hyped for the season.
Yeah.
Because I don't feel that. I think it's starting to bubble to the top a little bit, but the excitement for the season just has not been there, understandably so this year. But I think a big part of that is just not having the preseason, which everybody always, takes a dump on the preseason every year, but it really gets the juices flowing.
Yeah.
With Cam Newton, yeah, I wanted to get out in front of him. I put him as quarterback 12 really quickly. I think I immediately put him as quarterback 17, and then like a couple days later put him at quarterback 12. When I just started to look at the other quarterbacks, in context of the position, I was like, I'll take him over Daniel Jones, because I can't start Daniel Jones until week 4 anyways because of his schedule. Tom Brady comes out with a schedule that is not very, not very heartwarming early in the season. I put him ahead of Ben Roethlisberger, and I put him at quarterback 12, which is, that fringe quarterback 1. And absolutely, I mean, Norv Turner, has talked about how the offense in which Cam Newton excelled in the first 10 games of 2018 was very similar to what the Patriots do with the quick, the quick passing game, a lot of high percentage stuff, and then I think that the Patriots still have, that talent in place that they can support that with James White and Julian Edelman. And I think N'Keal Harris certainly should be a year better. They lost their O-line coach and right tackle Marcus Cannon, but I think the offensive line for the most part is at very worst going to be a top 12 unit. And Cam Newton's injuries, I mean, first of all, he just turned 31 3 months ago. I mean, he's not old.
Yeah.
And his injuries are really injuries that people recover from in the NFL. I mean, he's had plenty of time to recover from the Liz Frank fracture. The first shoulder surgery did not take, but the second shoulder, I mean, there was nothing wrong with his arm last year. It was just that he could not run after, enduring some bad luck during the preseason with the foot injury. Dr. Chow, who's been on point about this stuff consistently, believes that Cam Newton has been fully healthy for 6 months. It's just that the year that it was, because he had multiple injuries in a short amount of time, and I think that this happened to Jadeveon Clowney too, who had he's had microfracture surgery and all these different injuries. But the fact that they just couldn't bring this player into his facility, and he was probably expecting a $20 million contract, that's why Cam Newton didn't get a deal. And then he had to lower his asking price, and then the facility started to open, and then he got a deal. But he just, the year was working against Cam Newton, more so than really anybody else in the NFL because of the position he plays, the money that position commands, and the fact that he's had multiple injuries in a short amount of time. But I think it was the best signing of the offseason, and this Patriots team is going to probably win 9 or 10 games again.
I know they're going to make Buffalo sweat. This was supposed to be Buffalo's year to finally win the division, and they're going to sweat. And we get a rematch of New England and Miami in week 1. So, we'll see how far Brian Flores has gotten those guys around after they, again, hit that staggering blow. I'm going to be more, I don't know, gossipy or muckraking about the whole Cam Newton thing, Evan, and just say that I think part of the picture here was Cam Newton is a big personality. And what I mean by that is just he's going to be Cam Newton. He's not going to mute himself. He's not going to become a quiet person. And I think that just around the league, coaches didn't want to, unless you were going to go in and allow it to be Cam Newton's team, as you were alluding to with the idea of the contract, then bringing in Cam Newton was risky. Bringing in Cam Newton was added this volatility. And they were just ignoring how good he is at playing quarterback, the hardest job in sports. And Belichick just finally was like, well, how can this guy still be out there? Well, why?
And the factor that we never talk about, but you and I have talked about it, is the owner influence,
right?
And some owners aren't going to sign off on Cam Newton with the big hair.
Right, floral prints and little shawls and things. Yeah.
Right. I mean, I can't believe people actually care about that and talk about that. But it's who cares how he dresses? But some owners, seriously, don't want that as their
No.
franchise quarterback, and I'm sure that
They
also
want Nick
worked against-
Foles.
Yeah, Nick Foles, right?
Right? I mean, and that's what's absurd about this offseason is I get it with the lag in examinations and stuff, but there were a lot of deals done and moves made that weren't confirmed for months later. So it wasn't like teams were unwilling to even commit to players that they couldn't finish the deal until they saw them in person, which was going to happen at some indefinite period later. But I just want to see Cam Newton, and it pulls me in multiple directions, Evan, because it's the Patriots, and I've been looking forward to just as the larger plot. That's why I call them the Death Star, moving forward in the AFC, which Patrick Mahomes probably was going to do anyway. But at the same time, I want Cam Newton to vindicate himself.
Me
and
too.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to see it because it was absurd.
He's revered in the Carolina community for everything that he's done there. He gets the shit end of the stick from a lot of people, and it's really, really undeserved. And people are saying that he's washed up. Like,
no,
he was awesome in the first 10 games of 2018.
Yeah, you know who knows that? Bill Belichick.
Yes,
that's one of those situations where you see how Bill Belichick gushed about him. And not in this Bill Belichick way that is kind of like low-key trolling. Like when he was talking about COVID, that was awesome. He's like, no, it hasn't really, they get their food on a tray instead of getting it on the buffet line. Well, it's not bad. But he knows how difficult Cam Newton is to defend, which makes me think that he and Josh McDaniels are going to totally endorse, again, like we talked about with Mahomes and Lamar Jackson, like really creating an offense to embrace his strengths and allow him to play in his natural style. So this is going to be fun. And I want to see Cam Newton vindicated. Okay, your wide receiver picks, because again, in every other draft, if you're listening to this and you're not playing with these psychos that we play with, you can probably wait until the 5th, 6th, 7th round and get these receivers. But you had to take these guys in the early 4th, late 5th, and early 6th. Early 4th, and I get it, and I understand. And I understand being exuberant about him. Like my favorite kind of player to take, Evan, is the player that we don't know how high his ceiling is.
Yeah.
Like we just don't know how good.
You got to start it out. So I started robust RB, which is like very contrarian in this league.
Right.
I think most people are going balanced. You went for onesie positions in the 2nd and 3rd round. A bunch of, at least 3 people are going hardcore 0 RB, and a lot of people are just going wide receiver heavy. I mean, There's a lot of different strategies going on in this draft, but the strategy that I took was robust RB. So it started out with, who did I take?
Sanders, Mixon, and then Connor.
Sanders, Mixon, and then Connor early in the 3rd. By that time, so when it came back to me in the 4th, all the wide receiver ones were gone.
Right. In a typical league, like maybe Amari Cooper's there, maybe Adam Thielen's there, maybe Allen Robinson, Juju. You might get one of those guys at 402. Not in this league. No way.
Yeah. And so my decision, I think it's late in the 4th. Yeah. Came down to Terry McLaurin and A.J. Brown. I actually had A.J. Brown ranked ahead of Terry McLaurin, which I changed because, I try to keep my rankings like really consistent with what I'm actually doing in drafts. But yeah, I went for the targets because Terry McLaurin could get 150 targets this year. I don't think that I love A.J. Brown, and I do think he's going to get a target spike. He only had 84 last year. I think he can get into the 110 range this year, but I think Terry McLaurin could get like 150.
Right.
And so after starting robust RB, sort of like if you look at Denny's draft, he started really, really, obviously very aggressive at wide receiver, and then he's just looking for touches at the running back position. Or really catches, touches or catches, and he wound up with Leonard Fournette as his RB1 and Tariq Cohen as his RB2. I was hunting for targets at this point, and I took Terry McLaurin as my wide receiver 1.
And McLaurin, and you mentioned the targets. What's exciting about McLaurin, and Kelvin Harmon getting hurt helps him. Just the idea that there's not much else. At least finally somebody put something out there positive about Logan Thomas. I feel like I was all alone saying, don't forget about Logan Thomas. But Terry McLaurin is good. Like with the capital G, legit good. And I mean, if you say, well, who did he do it against? Watch him against Stephon Gilmore. Watch him against some of the top corners in the league last year. And his quarterback play is only going to get better. I mean, it can't be worse than it was last year. So, I think the fact that he got hurt in the middle of his breakout made his season end numbers hide how good he really was last year. They're just like Allen Robinson, another good example where you look at the numbers and they were better. They were better than those numbers, for factors that will hopefully change.
I went and got a pizza with Robert Mays around, I want to say it was like in early September like middle September last year. And Robert Mays, of course, of The Ringer, excellent football analyst. He compared Terry McLaurin to Keenan Allen at that time. And I was like, well, that's Keenan Allen with 4.35 speed. Okay. Because Keenan Allen ran like 4.7 or something. But I love that comparison still sticks into my mind. And then when you add the speed that Terry McLaurin has, it's easy to get behind him. I like the fact that Dwayne Haskins improved over the course of 2020. I like the fact that there's almost no other viable playmakers in the Redskins offense. Look, defenses are going to try to take them away, but the offense gets the first step on the defense. The offense is, they're getting off the ball first. And they can dictate a lot of times what the defense does with their formations, with the routes, the route combinations. So I'm not worried about that. I'm target hunting at this point in the 4th round.
Yes, and it's just he was 403, the 39th pick, and all y'all out there, you probably can get him in the 50s, maybe even the 60s. That's just how psychotic our league is. And Leonard Fournette was like 602, which you probably aren't going to see him fall past the 3rd round in a lot of leagues. So, as you've discussed, as you've laid out very well, and I know I've been beating this drum too, just don't take Leonard Fournette. Friends don't let friends take Leonard Fournette in fantasy drafts. You took Landry as your number 2, which, and the good thing about Landry is he's off the PUP list, had that hip surgery in February after the Pro Bowl. And you got to love that about him, by the way. He's not just going to take off the Pro Bowl. He's going to play even though he's hurt and then be like, yeah, maybe I should have that surgery anyway.
And he was wide receiver 14 in this format last year. I am hating myself if you look at the entirety of my draft for passing on Jarvis Landry or passing on Will Fuller for Jarvis Landry because I wound up getting Deshaun Watson in the 8th.
Right.
And freaking Denny got Will Fuller. So I'm going to –
couldn't help himself.
I'm going to offer him a trade after we're done drafting and try to get Will Fuller from him.
Yeah, and just by the way, folks, as Evan, you were inviting me to talk about my team. I had the 3rd pick. I took Ezekiel Elliott. And then with this group, I'm trying to make a nice VBD draft for Joe Bryant. And then I took Lamar Jackson, Travis Kelce, and then Lamar Jackson at 210 and 3-3. A combination that I think will be very difficult to pull off in a typical league. Zeke. And then I ended up with DK Metcalf and AJ Green. I can't help myself. I'm going to go into battle with AJ Green, and if he falls apart, then he breaks down on the battlefield. Then we'll live with that. But you took Landry, but then Deontay Johnson. And I love this. But again, in the 6th round, you're not going to have to take Deontay Johnson in the 6th round. You can get him in the 8th or 9th round. This is our league. But again, it amplifies the importance of wide receiver picks, right? You pause, and you're like, oh, man. Like, I know after I take this receiver, I'm probably not going to like what's there at the next pick, so I really have to get this one. You took Johnson. Why were you confident in him?
Confidence would not be the term that I would use. I was looking at a number of guys here. Tyler Boyd, Edelman. Although I can't remember, he might have gone a few picks before.
Yeah,
I can't remember.
Just two. No, it went Johnson, Boyd, Edelman actually. Then Cooks,
okay, all right, then, I'm just going off the top of my head. I even looked at Jamison Crowder here, but thought he might be available.
2 picks,
quite a bit later.
2 more picks, yeah.
So I sort of I think that Deontay Johnson probably has the best upside of that group. I don't know. It might be Crowder because Crowder could get 140 targets and catch 100 passes. I don't think Deontay Johnson is going to catch 100 passes, but what he was able to do last year with Duck Hodges and Mason Rudolph was really impressive to me.
Miraculous.
He was a guy he's also a guy that I didn't necessarily love his profile coming out of college, but then when I looked back on it in hindsight, and RotoViz has done a great job over the years of highlighting this, is that so many big-time wide receiver hits, they didn't necessarily need to be the most athletic, but if they were really good in the return game, that was an indication that they were like good at football. Or
Right.
we talked about this back in the day with Jarvis Landry. Do you remember this?
Yeah.
Because he didn't have a great athletic profile, but then if you looked at, first of all, his wide receiver production was great at LSU, but if you look at his return production at LSU, some guys are just like, they're instinctive, or
right.
they have it.
It's like processor speed.
Yes. And they're smart football players, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, Deontay Johnson, he was good in the return. He had a punt return touchdown last year for the Steelers.
Right. And it was a pretty dynamic play too, fun play to watch.
Yeah, 85-yarder. And he was great at Toledo is where he went, right? Yeah. So when I went, I remember initially sort of looking at him as a draft prospect and not necessarily, loving him, in large part because he just wasn't athletic. But man, when I look back in hindsight, I'm like, man, I should have put those together, that he was a better and the Steelers drafted him, which is never a bad thing for a wide receiver. So he's got a lot of positive data points. Great as a rookie with terrible quarterback play. Outstanding in the return game at both the college and the NFL levels. Has a big quarterback. Even if we get 65% of Ben Roethlisberger this year, it's going to be a huge upgrade on Mason Rudolph and the Duck. So Deontay Johnson is a guy that, I think that most of the industry is on him, but I don't think that his ADP has gone overboard yet. And he's someone I'm definitely willing to draft as my wide receiver 3, because I think he's got sensational upside. And I love Juju, but I don't think it's out of the range of potential outcomes that Deontay Johnson could become the Steelers' number 1.
Right. Well, it's in general. Speaking of RotoViz, I was just on the show with Mike Randall like a couple hours ago before I recorded with you. Great stuff. RotoViz is great. And I say this as a Steeler fan, so discount it. But I feel like the Ben Roethlisberger re-injury risk, or like you said, he's only 65% of himself, is way overpriced in Juju. And you took Connor in this draft; he qualifies, and Deontay Johnson qualifies because Roethlisberger showed that he could support like the number 1 fantasy receiver or one of the top receivers, and Juju was still an every week start, high ceiling wide receiver too. So you could easily see, even if Juju hits. Because Juju was a late first, early second round pick at this time last year, and that was without the assurance that we've gotten that he's going to stay in the slot. And so Juju could hit like that level of scoring, and Deontay Johnson can still vastly outproduce his ADP as that sidekick. There's still, and KGB, the man, mentions James Washington, and I like James Washington, and I think that he's going to play his role well, but his role is just not going to be as wide as Deontay Johnson. And what I like about Johnson too is he overcame some turbulence last year. There was a point that he was kind of falling out of favor. He made a couple of big mistakes, and he had to get through that, and he played his best football at the end of the year. You love that too for the rookie wall. I think the rookie wall, or just the wall for players who aren't as conditioned as well. The whole thing of getting back into football shape this year is going to be different for some players, but there are going to be some players who, even if without the structure of training camp, would show up for week 1 in football shape. And it's just a little bit of an indicator. And then Deontay Johnson also reveals, and I guess this was revealed back in February, but it was just so many things were happening, that he had a hernia for a lot of the year, that he was playing hurt. Like those big games at the end of the year, he was playing with an injury. So that's not bad when we're looking at his outlook.
Well, the last time that we saw Ben Roethlisberger, the Steelers led the NFL in pass attempts, and passing yardage. And that's very, very, I'm buying up like pretty much every Steeler. I think that Connor has sort of gotten to the right range, early in the offseason. He was like going the 5th and 6th round. I was like, what? And he started to get to the right range, which is really like definitely in the 3rd round, definitely ahead of like Leonard Fournette and guys in really, really bad situations. And, Deontay Johnson, I think he's solid in line with ADP right now. I think that Juju is a little bit undervalued. I think that Eric Ebron is definitely undervalued. But I thought that the quote from Randy Fichtner, their OC, about, he's like, I'm so excited to have Ben back. I was like, oh man, you know, all you got to do is go back and sip Diet Cokes, you know, now because Ben's going to be running this show. Ben runs the show when Ben is healthy, and they're going to go back to. I mean, he's the offensive coordinator, you know, more so than I think any quarterback in the NFL. I think that Ben Roethlisberger is the Steelers' offensive coordinator.
Yeah, well, and Finkner was his quarterback coach. That's probably why he was picked to be the offensive coordinator.
Oh,
anyway,
Ben was like, hey, we got to get rid of Todd Haley, who, by the way, did some good things for Ben's career.
Yes.
Thank
you.
Yes. And he's like, no, you know, we're my buddy. We're my buddy now is gonna, you know.
It's like he's the Dewell Gaines to Adam Gase. In this case. Like they travel together. I mean, the quarterback coach or the yes guy, because that's, I mean, again, I'm getting the gossip of stuff. Like, how much did Ben Roethlisberger? How much was his role in Bruce Arians? Not be, I don't know. The Todd Haley thing was interesting because his name was mud around the league when the Steelers hired him. I really think that had to do with his dad. You know, his dad was one of the architects of the dynasty. Right? Yeah, I mean, you know, and Haley got Ben Roethlisberger to play within himself, like take what the defense gives you or something like that, and not have that long clock where Roethlisberger just feels like he can outlast the defense no matter what.
And got Todd Haley, and Todd Haley got Ben to get the ball out quickly.
Yeah,
which, you know, had not been emphasized under Bruce Arians.
No,
but then when Todd Haley came in, Ben was, I mean, because they were worried about the wear and tear on Ben Roethlisberger. He was just he's carrying guys on his back every pass attempt, you know. But yeah, no, it's fun to relive that. But yeah, I think that Ben's going to be running the show, and they're just going to do whatever Ben says.
Yeah,
and that's good for. I think that's good for James Conner because Ben's, you know, if they try to send McFarland out there or Benny Snell out there, Ben's going to be like, nope, you know, get him back on the sideline. We're running with you know, the Terminator Conner.
And Matt Canada. I'm hoping Matt Canada does for the offense what Terrell Austin did for the defense last year. Just spruce things up a little bit. I know that they've been talking about more pre-snap motions, doing more things that, and of course, Canada coached Jalen Samuels. He coached Anthony McFarland. Lots of interesting, and he also made the Pitt offense viable. So all kinds of interesting connections there to Pittsburgh, Canada, all those things. Not going to turn this into a Steelers show. We'll go off the rails after this last thing to go over, because I'm just curious what you think. I feel like no player has been talked about more in our fantasy circles for the last week than Ronald Jones. And I can't help. I dabble. I took Ronald Jones. So I had Zeke, and then I didn't take another running back until the 6-7 turn. I took Raheem Mostert. It was on your show with Adam. Good time. We debated Raheem Mostert. We'll continue to debate Raheem Mostert right up until they start playing. And I took the plunge. I took Ronald Jones at 7-2. Now, you have on one side this idea of Bruce Arians doesn't tell the truth about what his running back commitments, et cetera. On the other side, you have a lot of things where at least Arians is saying what you want to hear if you're taking Ronald Jones. Do you have a strong take on Ronald Jones in either direction?
My strong take is that the person who's going to dictate the running back playing time in Tampa Bay is going to be not the fantasy analyst that wins the argument about how talented or not Ronald Jones is. You know, it's going to be Tom Brady. And who does Tom Brady trust? Now we've seen a bunch of kind of fluff pieces about Ronald Jones. I mean, Ronald Jones was active in the offseason workouts that Tom Brady held. Tom Brady got some criticism for that, but Ronald Jones was there. He's been catching 300 balls a day. You know, unfortunately, these are the sort of data points that we're going to have to work on this year because there are, you know, we don't have Dwayne McFarland and Adam Levitan being able to chart every, you know, preseason game and give us, you know, the goods on who's running with the Brady group. You know, we're sort of, we're going to be pulled by coach speak and fluff pieces more than usual this year. And we're going to have to just try to keep our head down and, you know, try to make the best decisions that we can and probably not get sucked in too much one way or the other. But I do think that Ronald Jones, number one, had a better year last year than, you know, you come off thinking. I think that he is the most talented runner in the backfield right now at this stage of Keyshawn Vaughn and LaShawn McCoy and Dario Ogunbowale's careers. And, you know, so I like him as a 7th round pick. I think that is where he belongs, but you will see him go in the 5th and 6th rounds at times. And I think that that's a little too aggressive. I think that at the end of the day, they're going to use multiple backs. and it's going to be a frustrating situation. And Gronk and Evans and Godwin are gonna, and maybe Brait are gonna hog the touchdowns, and there's not going to be really any level of consistent. I mean, when you think about a running back that Tom Brady might trust, where does Ronald Jones come in on that level? I mean,
no, it's true.
Yeah,
it's true. And what Jones needs to do to make all of us who take him look smart is for his talent to really bubble to the surface that we saw at USC, and the game start to slow down for him. And I think one of the most important points you hit is he's better than you thought he was last year. Like if you go back and watch his plays last year, say he's not bad. Whatever that rookie year, whatever happened there, we can put that behind us. That wasn't a massive glaring indicator that he's going to be a bust and a wasted pick. It was just slow start. Okay. As we count down here, taking it back to life, because we're all still human beings. And I did the marathon drive camping. That's what we can do for our vacations now, Evan. And I was close. I was on the other side of Lake Michigan. And Lake Michigan's wonderful for swimming and camping and the sand dunes on the west coast of Michigan. I loved it. I loved Michigan. I may be spending a lot more time there in the future. When I say summer vacation, Evan, what pops into your head when I say summer vacation?
Hopefully I get to do it in 2021 because I usually go with my family to Cape Cod every year. Some of my family still went, but I didn't. I've gone to North Carolina for the past couple of years with Warren Sharp. The OBX. Yeah. Is that what they call it? Oh, it's so awesome, man. It's so awesome. I usually go to Wisconsin Dells. I take my daughter to Wisconsin Dells. Didn't do any of that this year, unfortunately. But I hope to get to do it again in 2021. Actually, Pat Thorman, JJ Zacharyson, and Denny Carter and I actually were going to go and rent, or they were going to rent like a big castle in Truro, Massachusetts on Cape Cod. And we were just going to have an absolute blast, but we couldn't. We decided by like May that it wasn't going to happen.
I've only been to Cape Cod once, but it's really idyllic, just like Michigan. Like there's some places it's almost like a fairy tale, and you can feel it. Like I recommend everybody just to get back out into nature, and purge, like clean out, detox your system sometimes of like the world of people, because the world of people is just full of all kinds of things. But nature, it's like hearing your mother's heartbeat from the womb again, when you're out in nature. And what I remember about Cape Cod were the cranberry farms. And it came back when I was on the west coast of Michigan because of the sand dunes. Because in the cranberry farms, you can just booking it down a sandy hill. Like you have no fear of danger. I don't know. Maybe now I'm 45. I should have. But it's fun because you can actually feel like you're flying. Like you can like jump almost while you're running, and the sand dune just kind of catches you. But it's fantastic. But all these places you talk about too, the Dells, I just remember for the few times I've been up there, like as you're driving down the road, the places that have big cheese billboards and signs.
Oh yeah.
The same way it'd be like adult store or something. You know what I mean? Like just like this cheese.
But they just have cheese there.
Yeah. It really is.
And they have like little meats too. I mean, it's a great place to shop if you're into that stuff. I mean, and truly, I went to college at Marquette in Milwaukee. And I remember when, I first got there, I was like, the milk tastes like way better than I've ever tasted milk in my life. I mean, they got the best freaking milk. If you like to just drink like a glass of milk every now and again, they've got that in Wisconsin. They have the absolute best milk.
It's wholesome, right? I mean, it's funny because it reminds me of, I can't remember the philosopher, but they talk about like simulations, and then I'll say it wrong, like Samakara or something like that, where it's like we have this idea of apple, of like this thing is an apple, but then if you eat an apple like right off of a tree in an orchard in Washington or something, you'll be like, oh, this is actually an apple. That thing I've been experiencing is something based on the actual thing. This is the real thing. And yeah, Wisconsin dairy. I mean, come on. And in Michigan, at the butcher shop in the place, and hey, Lang, who hooked us up, and Bob Henry, Bob Henry broke quarantine to hang out with us. I was like, I mean, seriously, I'm going to weep. It was so beautiful. Awesome. But there was a place in Milford where my
that's Connecticut?
Lang, no, in Michigan. Milford.
Okay.
It's like, like Oakland County, Michigan, outside of Detroit.
Yes. Okay.
And they had a butcher shop there called the Village Butcher, which was amazing. And they had this stuff called Hunter sausage. And it was just like, again, like a Slim Jim or like your classic beef stick, but it was incredible. Like the flavors and everything were amazing. I wish I'd gotten like 5 pounds of it to take home with me. So yes, all of those things beckoning us back. You mentioned DFS, right? So we've got a few minutes left. Let's have some fun. Who do we want to pour one out for that you didn't get to play in your preseason DFS lineup this year?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. I've been honestly trying not to think about it because
I understand. I don't want to pain.
Let me. Where to even begin? I would say Jalen Hurd maybe a little bit. I would say Jalen Hurts also.
Like you didn't even have to go like the next player in the NFL phone book.
Yeah. Those guys come to mind. Let me think here. Hakeem Butler, maybe.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to see him play. Like he's going to get cut now, man. This sucks for a lot of players like that.
Yeah.
Isabella too. But yeah, I mean, thinking along those lines, maybe Tyler Johnson with the Buccaneers. See, he reminded me a lot of Miles Austin. Austin, though, might be like a figment of the past. I don't know if he would have been as great today as he was then. I don't know. I love Miles Austin.
Yeah.
I don't know. Who are some guys that you would have liked to play?
Well, the rookies, man. I mean, this is like what I'm going to miss most from not having a preseason is that it's just one of those things that gets tuned from watching like a certain amount. It's like the Gladwell thing of like, I'm sure I've watched 10,000 hours of football in my life,
Oh, yeah.
Probably like the last 3 or 4 years. But just the rookies, like preseason, who cares, whatever. But when you watch the rookies for the first time on an NFL football field, even though it's preseason, you see the real ones. Like you can just like right away, something in your brain will say, that's it. That guy's got the glow. He's got the stuff. And at preseason DFS was a fun time to take advantage of that. And then you're right. It's all those guys fighting for roster spots at the bottom, including the post-hype breakout guys. Like you said, Hurd and Butler, some of these guys that were injured. Because what we're looking for is that first indicator. And I think that in a lot of cases, the players that we hold near and dear to our hearts in fantasy football, their first preseason, like sometimes they'll even play in the first or second preseason game. And then the coaches will be like, we don't even need to play this guy anymore.
Yep.
Like we don't, he's like that might have been like Jonathan Taylor this year, or something like that, or Dobbins. So we definitely missed out on those data points. I mean, for those of us doing we do, hopefully, everybody who's with us in the fantasy football world still will value our services, but certainly they value the time we can spend with them, and we're out there doing this, and we're going to continue to do this, and we continue to hear good news about NFL in terms of positive COVID rates, and so far training camp.
And I think that's a very important point. Is that I understand that there are real life issues out there that everyone needs to consider, and like I'm a huge promoter of wearing a mask and all that, but I think that there's just a lot of negativity out there, and I think that trying to stay optimistic is not only good. I mean, I think it's good for mental health, and and trying to take the optimistic view on a lot of situations is good for us, and I think good for the entire community. I understand that there is a big risk to the season and all that, but these players want to be out there playing. I mean, all things considered, I think that a very small number of players opted out of the season.
Yeah,
and the vast majority of them were like practice squad / players that were just going to be competing for a roster spot. And the players, like they need these checks, and they're young dudes that are at less risk of developing a serious case of the virus. And I'm rooting for the players, and I'm rooting for our industry, and I'm rooting for the sport, because I really do think it is good for all of us to be able to have this sort of outlet. I mean, just having like baseball on, and I know you're into hockey, and It's just it's so much better than when we didn't have anything. Even like, watch like the PGA Championship. I'm not usually like a golf watcher, but it's just I don't know, man. I feel a lot better when sports are going on, and I'm really, really rooting for them to be able to outlast this.
It's a shared experience, right? I mean, I like one of the things I say on the show sometimes is human connection is oxygen for us, for our souls, connection to other human beings. And coronavirus has greatly limited our ability to have human connections and online and different things, Zoom calls. There's we can get some of that, but I think that everybody is realizing just how much we were getting, like recharging us, right? Like think of it like plugging your phone into the charger, right? Like there are lots of things that recharged us that we don't have now. Certainly sports were one of those things. And I want to be positive. I also want to call out things when I see things, not so much in the context of this show where my role is a fantasy analyst, but so there's a balance between staying positive and still acknowledging things that are going on that maybe aren't right, but definitely staying positive in terms of how us spending this time together can continue our connections to each other and having a positive influence in each other's life. Of course, I want to mention Matt Waldman again. In some ways, this is like acceptance, right? After he said a couple of days ago, after all the pontification about the unknown, in the end, it's just another day where something can be done to make future days better, accept what you cannot control and do what you can. It's like the old serenity prayer, And luckily, we've been both at this for a while, Evan, thanks to the kind people out there who support us and continue to support us, and appreciate you listening and subscribing to Establish the Run or Football Guys, or getting on the mailing list, or even just following us on Twitter and engaging us, because we wouldn't be able to do this without you. And we certainly enjoy it, and we enjoy it because of how much you enjoy it. So we're getting ramped up. It might not totally feel like it, but football is back. It's around the corner. News is coming in. We're taking our flags. We're planting them, and jump back in water. At least we're in the water. It seems fine to me, and we'll continue to be there. So, folks, thank you so much. Thank you, Evan, for coming out to resume. I had a couple weeks hiatus from the couch. Again, you already know, folks. Evan, Establish the Run at Evan Silva, Football Guys, and so on. Thank you, everybody, always for being the best, providing the most energy, being the classiest. And now I wait a few seconds so I don't accidentally cut that off.